Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the Mining Podcast. And today's guest is Mike Venter, who's an experienced exploration geologist who's worked in a wide range of commodities from obviously corporate companies, junior, private, through to sort of private companies. Although he specialises more in the battery critical new technology materials like graphite, lithium, and many others. And also their impact on the new energy efficiency and infrastructure. I'm getting Mike on the podcast as a few of you on LinkedIn have requested to know more knowledge and more information around graphite and lithium. And I know Mike knows his stuff. Just before I introduce Mike, just want to remind everyone that apart from this podcast going out on the various platforms like iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, you can also watch this interview in person on our YouTube channel, which is obviously Dig Deep, the Mining Podcast. So for those that are watching this, can you please share this video so obviously more people can have the opportunity to listen to this episode and the others, so they can obviously learn and educate themselves. It's something to do with the algorithms, but yeah, appreciate if you can like and share. So let's get moving on with this podcast, and like to obviously welcome Mike. How you doing, Mike?
Hello, Rob. Yeah, doing well, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to talk on your podcast.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you taking your time out of your day, especially in sunny Cape Town. So as we always obviously start these podcasts off, just wondering if you can give the audience an overview of your background, your career, from way back to sort of present day.
Yeah, okay. Way back, certainly, back to 1993. I graduated as a geologist from University of Cape Town, and after working my time on an underground Witwatersrand gold mine, I got the break into exploration. So for the last 27 odd years, I've worked across a range of commodities, from base metals through to precious stones, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. But more recently, I got more involved in, as you mentioned, the critical or the battery metals. So I've been involved in that space for the last 10 years, working for a global producer of critical metals, as well as an independent consultant.
Okay, and so what? Just briefly, just what are you doing sort of nowadays?
I've been an independent consultant, sort of a standalone independent consultancy, based here in Cape Town. But all my work is outside of South Africa, mainly in Africa, with some work in Brazil as well. But pretty much, as I said, focusing on the battery metals, which is graphite, lithium, nickel, rare earths as well. So that's been my sort of niche for the last 10 years, I would say.
Okay. And obviously what we really want to talk about is, or mainly talk about, is graphite. What got you into sort of graphite, and obviously your experience around graphite?
I think I got into graphite a bit by chance. I was doing work for a client that had a uranium target in northern Mozambique. But when we went out into the field and did some validation, it turned out to be a hell of a big graphite deposit, which is now the Balama deposit, which is being mined by Sila Resources. So yeah. That was the sort of first boots on the ground experience of graphite. And then following that, I worked for a company called Advanced Metallurgical Group, AMG, which basically was a vertically integrated company that mined and processed a lot of these critical metals, including them was graphite. And they had mines and operations in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, in Sri Lanka, as well as Germany. So through my role at this company, I got a lot of exposure into graphite, right from exploration right through to the downstream processing of graphite. So I got to understand the industry pretty well, and considering it's an industry that's traditionally been dominated by the Chinese, it also positioned me really well to have a good solid understanding of graphite. Yeah, and in the last 5 years, I've been, as I said, as an independent consultant, doing work on audits, reviews, that type of thing, mineral resource estimation, on projects mainly in Eastern and Southeast Africa and Madagascar.
Okay. Before we go on and speak more about obviously EV, batteries, etc., what are the main attributes of graphite itself, and where else is graphite actually used within our world?
Well, look, I think about 15 or 20 years ago, if you mentioned graphite, people said, yeah, well, it's the stuff that goes into, you know, your pencils that you use at school, which is true. It is used, but graphite is traditionally used in the, you know, in the steel industries. Probably about majority of the market share is about in the steel industry, but then the lithium-ion batteries are also becoming a major growth for graphite. And it all boils down to the qualities of graphite. It's an excellent conductor of heat and electricity, and importantly, it's relatively inert. In other words, it can survive attack by most chemicals. So it's a very it's got a lot of physical and chemical properties, and one of them is the application in lithium-ion batteries, which is basically because of its storage ability, its stability, and its cost efficiency. And graphite is the sort of go-to material for the anode of your lithium-ion battery. You get your cathode and your anode. So graphite is almost exclusively used in the anode. So with the growth of EVs and portable technologies, you know, the materials that go into the anode and the cathode are becoming, you know, more and more important to produce.
Yeah, and so what everyday objects would graphite be in that we probably wouldn't necessarily know? I mean, not necessarily just mining people, but just everyday people.
Your average mobile phone probably has about 15 grams of spherical graphite in it, which goes into the lithium-ion battery. Right up to, say, a Tesla Model S, that battery pack probably contains about 27 kilograms of spherical graphite. So there's a lot of graphite that goes into these, and of course, as the larger your battery pack and your range, the more of these battery metals and materials you need.
I wonder if you can give us again more of an overview of the graphite, and with obviously the I suppose the introduction of everything becoming more battery-like. All of our objects seem to be now run on batteries more so than anything else, and obviously that's growing. I wonder if you can give us a bigger overview of the importance of graphite to the EV market, the battery market, etc.
Yeah, well, as I said, graphite is the go-to material for the anode. There's very little substitution, and so graphite's seen as the only material that you can use in the anode of these lithium-ion batteries. Now, just looking at electrical vehicles, and you look at what's happening in Europe in terms of emission controls. I think it's Germany that want to phase out internal combustion engines by 2030. And so all these regulations, and coupled with the fact that the electric vehicle is getting cheaper and cheaper, and soon it's going to be on parity, with buying an internal combustion engine. So all these electrical vehicles need batteries, and they need lithium-ion batteries, and all the components that go into them. And graphite being the anode, which is 50% of your battery, there's a significant demand for graphite. But it's not all graphite's the same. So that goes into where the best places, who produces graphite, and that type of thing.
Yeah. And whereabouts is sort of graphite found, and what are the different types?
You get three main types. So you get synthetic graphite, and you get natural graphite. Synthetic graphite is made commercially using low grade carbon materials, but that's to produce the high spec graphite that goes into lithium-ion batteries. It's quite an energy intensive and quite an expensive process. And flake or natural graphite has some better applications, also some better applications than synthetic in your lithium-ion battery. So you get three types of natural graphite. One is the amorphous type, which is pretty much low grade. It's not used in lithium-ion batteries, that's for certain. Then you get your flake or crystalline flake graphite. And this is where most of the exploration pure. And at the moment, it's only mined in Sri Lanka. So it's a very high grade product, but it's not really suitable for lithium-ion batteries. So it's really the flake graphite, and China has traditionally been the world's largest producer of flake graphite, and they continue to dominate the market in terms of production and therefore pricing as well to a large extent. Other large producers are India and Brazil, and then more recently, as I mentioned earlier, Syra Resources Balama mine, which is actually the world's largest graphite mine, opened a couple of years ago, but has been facing its own challenges as well. There are a couple of small producers in Madagascar, but these are really relatively small operations. But I think in the graphite space, bigger is not necessarily better. It's not necessarily all about the grade in the ground. It's all about the quality of the graphite.
Yeah. So if obviously exploration companies were looking at regions, jurisdictions, where's probably the best places around the world that they could potentially discover some of the good graphite?
Well, you need to look for the right rock types that host the flake type of graphite, and these are always 9 times or majority of the time are highly metamorphosed rocks that were originally sediments that contained organic matter. So you need to find the right environments. If you overcook your graphite, then it may turn into amorphous graphite. So you need the right conditions geologically in terms of pressure and temperature over the evolution of and then that will define your graphite deposit, which is relatively easy to discover using geophysical techniques, because graphite being an excellent conductor, using methods like electromagnetics, airborne electromagnetics really can delineate a potentially graphite bearing horizon. All you need to do is drill it. So I think defining a graphite resource is relatively easy, but trying to get a handle on the actual quality of the graphite, because as I said, it's flake graphite, and pricing ranges from small flake to large flake, and there's a whole bunch of challenges that go about producing a consistent product for your client or your offtake partner.
Yeah. What about the supply and demand? So in terms of supply and demand, what has been happening over, say, the last 5 years? What's the current situation, and what's the future of supply and demand? Obviously, because it's going to be essential, even more so as we move into this new era.
Yeah, I think there's quite a long value chain in graphite. From mine, a mine will basically produce a concentrate, and then that concentrate is sold to generally a downstream anode producer. I'm talking specifically for the lithium-ion battery market here, and all that downstream expertise, taking from concentrate through to spherical graphite, which is what coated spherical graphite, which goes into your lithium-ion battery. There's a lot of beneficiation steps that needs to go into that, and right now China and to maybe a less extent Japan and Korea basically control producing anode materials. So it's very much China driven, and of course there are some Australian and Canadian companies that are trying to also get vertically integrated by producing their own downstream material for the batteries, but it's expensive, and whether or not they can compete with China, who does this on a large commercial scale, remains to be seen. So to a large extent, China control the pricing of flake graphite concentrate that, let's say, a mine would sell, right through to producing the final material that goes into the anode. So they do control it a lot. But in terms of demand going forward, as I said, there's if you see what Tesla's doing and their ambitions, there's going to be a huge demand for all these battery materials, graphite included. And with the current, and if you take all the graphite exploration projects and development projects into account, they still reckon there's going to be a shortfall in supply come about 2027, 2028 for graphite. So that's got to put a squeeze, hopefully, on prices. The graphite prices have been pretty static over the last couple of years. So with China's economy looks like it's picking up, as evidenced by the copper price. That means that demand for steel would increase, and graphite's traditionally used in the steel industry. So there's going to be demand from that aspect, as well as from this growing lithium-ion battery market. So the upside is good. It's just a question of there's a lot of projects in the world, in Canada, in Tanzania, and Mozambique, in Australia, that have got graphite projects good to go, but they're just lacking the funding to get the mine up and running. And it's graphite. The graphite market is not clear cut like, say, a precious metal. It's not a commodity. It's actually an industrial mineral at the end of the day, and everything is based on the quality of your product and an offtake. And those terms are often not disclosed, so you don't really know exactly what people are paying for their graphite.
Yeah. So do you say there's a lot of opportunity in the market for new people to get into graphite, or do you think existing companies that are in the graphite market just sort of growing bigger? And obviously you refer to a lot of projects out there, but they're obviously not attracting money. Is that because the supply and demand, there's obviously a lot more supply in the industry at current levels? However, as the years go on, as there's more and more vehicles, batteries being produced, not necessarily just vehicles, but more batteries being produced, the price then will slowly go up. But obviously it is dictated by China as well.
Yeah, and I think China does play a large role in controlling the prices. But I think they can only do that for so long. And as there's been graphite has been stated as a critical material or critical mineral in the US and in Europe. And the US in particular has been quite outspoken and has passed, I think, some presidential directives in terms of ensuring that the US in particular has a supply of their own, battery metal, which includes graphite. So there's certainly, some pressure, and also in terms of, Elon Musk was talking about, he wants green nickel, and he wants to ensure that the materials that go into his Tesla batteries are clean, environmentally sourced, sustainable. And one thing about the Chinese anode market and their processes, there's a lot of nasty acids that get used in making spherical coated graphite. So I think there's a bit of a gray area in terms of how clean is the graphite going into our anode. So that's why there's a lot of companies that are now looking at producing their own anode material and trying to take that dependence away from China. But it's, as I said, to compete with China that does this on a commercial scale, I don't know if that's achievable in the short term.
You mentioned obviously there's a lot of projects out there in obviously various countries. What stages are some of these projects at? Are they at sort of about to be obviously trying to find funding, or are they sort of at really pre-feasibility? And
I would say a lot of them are at or have completed BFS, DFS level of studies. Most of them are all permitted and good to go in terms of mining rights, etc., environmental authorizations. It's just a question of an investor coming in and funding it. There are a couple of graphite juniors, one in Mozambique that's had some significant investment by a Chinese investor, but they still need another $25 million to get them over the line to start construction. Some projects have started construction, but now sort of have stopped. So some have got a tailings dam wall that's been built and a camp to accommodate 150 people, but that they can't go any further because they don't have the money. So there's a lot of projects that are in limbo, and and shareholders are losing patience. So it's a pretty stressful time. And the thing is, the demand is coming, and these projects need to be financed now so that they can be in production when this shortfall comes in 4 or 5 years time.
So when do you see that tipping point happening? When do you see people then slowly start putting money into graphite?
I think we've started seeing it in the lithium space in particular, where Tesla in particular have said are sourcing lithium from local producers, and that's the first move of an OEM like Tesla going straight to a hard rock supplier mine and saying, we want to buy your concentrate. That's a first. It never operates like it, because there's always the mine sells its concentrate to a downstream processor, and then eventually that ends up going into the vehicle. So that move by Tesla, it probably and I think BMW and all the other OEMs might follow suit and say, right, we want to ensure supply, but whether or not they'll invest in a mine, they still need to take that concentrate and produce the spherical graphite that goes into, and that technology still resides with China. So it's going to be interesting. It's similar to how China controls the rare earth industry as well. They really do have that control. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah. I want to move on and talk about lithium. And I just wanted to give us again an overview of lithium in the sort of a green economy.
Yeah, look, it's not called a lithium-ion battery for nothing. In fact, the technology for lithium-ion batteries, I think, was patented, by Sony back in the 70s. But it's only now, with increased R&D being done in the size of the battery and its range and its extent. So now you can use lithium-ion batteries to run vehicles. Lithium also is seeing a major demand for it, and there's two main types of sources. One is the brines, which are mainly extracted from the what they call the lithium triangle down in South America, and hard rock lithium projects, which most of them being in Australia. But lithium isn't a commodity. At the end of the day, it turns out being a specialty chemical, because you also, just like graphite, you have to convert your concentrate into a chemical, either be it lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide, and that's what goes into lithium-ion batteries. But it's all about quality and purity, and a lot of that downstream conversion from your concentrate into carbonate and hydroxide, also to a large extent, that technology also resides in China, Japan, and South Korea.
And how is the supply and demand of lithium? Because I'd say sort of 12 months ago, everyone seemed to be on top of lithium. And then over the course of this year, and even more so now, it's not talked about much. Is there a reason behind that?
There was a lithium boom a couple of years ago, and since then, prices have tanked. And what happened was, I think, a combination of things. I think there were a lot of Australian hard rock lithium producers that came online, produced a lot of their product, and which maybe caused a bit of oversupply with the downstream Chinese converters. And then also, China also cut its subsidies for electric vehicles as well. So that also has a knock-on effect on the market. But having said that, I think all the lithium gurus out there are pointing to, you know, seriously an uptick in lithium prices, certainly starting in 2021. And I think the shortfall for lithium is a lot more closer to home, more not 2028, but probably, you know, 2022. So there's, like graphite, there's a lot of good quality lithium projects out there that are ready to start, but you know, there's a lot of good projects in Africa. But the problem with these types of projects is you need good infrastructure, especially access to a port, if you're going to be producing a concentrate. So, you know, there's some world-class lithium deposits, one being in the DRC. It's probably the largest lithium deposit in the world, but you know, their challenge is trying to get that product out, you know, cheaply. And that's, you know, there might be a much better, much smaller scale project in Canada. You know, so you know, Tesla would probably rather buy their concentrate from there rather than ship it from the DRC, for example.
And so what challenges would you say there is with both graphite and lithium moving forward?
I think, as speaking as a geologist, you know, I don't think grade, I don't think tonnage and grade are always the go-tos. It's not like a gold deposit or a base metal deposit. It's all about the ability. It's all about quality and being able to produce a product consistently and to a spec. And your offtake partner who wants to buy your concentrate, be it graphite or lithium concentrate, they want it at that spec, and if it's not at that spec, they either will not buy it or you'll get paid less. And they often change their specs. You know, battery chemistries change all the time. You know, so with that are the demands on, you know, the run of mine material. So if the spec changes, can your plant and your ore body handle it? And would you be able to adjust your? So that's why it's, in a lot of these instances, it's good to have a relatively small operation. I'm speaking more on graphite, so that you can, you know, be relatively nimble and you know, tweak your process to satisfy what your offtake wants, because they're the guys that pay the bills.
Yeah, you mentioned quality. Is that quality of the concentrate from the mine, or the quality once the concentrate is in that next process to turn it into a usable form of graphite?
Well, it's the quality of the concentrate in terms of the carbon content. So most projects will aim to produce anything north of 94% carbon in their concentrate. Okay, but with graphite, not only talking about the you know, the carbon content, the quality, but it's the flake size. Larger flake size. When I say large flake size, I'm talking, you know, 180 microns. That's 0.2 of a mil. That's a large flake. So it's, and you know, so larger flake often will command much higher prices. But you know, large flake deposits often are very low grade. So you know, it's not always about grade in the ground. You can have fantastic large flake graphite, but your average grade is 3%, which is pretty low for graphite deposits. Graphite deposits range from 3% all the way up to, you know, 30%, and the Sri Lankan vein deposits, well, they're almost pure, up to 95% in situ.
I want to talk about the green economy. It seems obviously the governments are continuously and starting to promote a green economy. What other minerals, metals are associated with the whole green economy, and where are some of these found, for instance?
Well, I think it's the green economy, and it's also the mobile portable economy. And if you had to look at the amount of metals that were used, so if you had to look at the periodic table and looked at the amount of metals that were used when Henry Ford put together his car, compared to now what we're putting into your state-of-the-art EV or a wind turbine, for example, there's almost every metal, not every metal in the periodic table, but a lot is used. In particular, rare earths, for example. Rare earths are an integral part of, most portable technology, and in particular, neodymium and praseodymium are the key ingredients that go into magnets, and these are the magnets that drive wind turbine motors, and also the motors in your electric vehicles also would need those rare earths as well. So apart from the critical metals, I was talking about graphite going into the anode. Now on the other side is the cathode, which is your lithium. Nickel is becoming a major component of batteries as well, and cobalt, of course, as well as manganese. So those are the key sort of, I would say, battery metals. And of course, cobalt has been on everyone's lips because there's only really one producer in the world that produces cobalt, and that's the DRC. And there's been a lot of talk about artisanal small-scale mining using child labor, et cetera. So there's a lot of sensitivity about how the cobalt is sourced for a lot of these downstream auto electric motor producers.
You mentioned obviously cars, from when Henry Ford produced the car to obviously say we can talk about obviously Tesla. How many more, what's the ratio in terms of sort of metals, minerals that are needed now compared to when Henry Ford made a car? So we've got some sort of comparison.
Well, I think that's a good question.
And roughly,
I think you'd imagine a lot more, steel, iron would go into a traditional internal combustion engine, as opposed to an electric vehicle, which I think would be some steel component to it, but obviously not as much. So, but I think that the majority cost of an electric vehicle is its battery pack, and I think that's where the drive at the moment is to try and drive the cost. It's generally worked on per kilowatt hour, and I think the target is to get it below $100 per kilowatt hour, and I think they're about to achieve that. And when that happens, that starts making it really cheap to produce electric vehicles and make them on parity with internal combustion engines. So I suppose this is a reality if you live in Europe, where the charging infrastructure, well, you probably may not even need charging infrastructure depending on what you want to use your EV for. And in the States, but places like here in South Africa or in Africa, I think EVs will probably be the realm of just the city dwellers, and I don't see it being rolled out anywhere else, just because of the charging infrastructure that probably needs to be done. And in Australia, they talk about range envy for electric vehicles, but if you want to drive in Australia, it's a long distances are far. So I'm not too sure whether the EV would fit in, and people would rather stick to a double cab with a double long range tank of fuel.
Yeah, certainly. And I used to live in Australia myself. I lived out there 10 years, and I drove across the Nullarbor, which is from sort of Adelaide to Perth. And yeah, I can't see too many charging stations along there. So so I suppose you have to look at it that EV vehicles are going to be in more centralized locations rather than, and especially like a place like the UK. Yeah, it might be throughout the UK, but larger continents, Australia, Africa, wherever, China, it's going to be a bit more sparse.
Yeah, and a lot of these automakers, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Toyota, they've got huge plants in South Africa, for example, which now has to be pretty much retooled to start producing EVs because the cars are exported to Europe. So there's going to be a change in, I think, in the industry as well, in the automaking industry, to accommodate this EVs. I think they certainly are not going to disappear. I think 15 years ago, if you mentioned, or 10 years ago, if you'd mentioned Tesla or Elon Musk, people probably wouldn't know who you're talking about. And he's really, I wouldn't say he's the Henry Ford, but I remember seeing an image of I think it was New York in 1900, and it said, spot the motor vehicle, and you could see one motor vehicle in a sea of horse-drawn carts and horses. And then 9 years later, no, I think it was 5 years later, they took the same picture and they said spot the horse, and it was all motor vehicles. So I don't think it's going to happen that quickly here, but it's I think the EV uptake in Europe has been quite dramatic. I think a lot more people are turning to EVs. And this is going to drive a demand for the raw materials that go into batteries, and until some investment goes into producing these raw materials, there's going to be a bit of a problem in the supply chain.
Yeah. And what is the supply and demand around some of these other minerals that you mentioned, like nickel, manganese? Obviously, you mentioned cobalt.
Yeah, look, nickel has always traditionally been used in the steel industry. So a majority of nickel produced nowadays is going into the steel industry, but like graphite, the lithium-ion battery market is certainly requiring a demand for nickel. And I mentioned Tesla again. They're looking for local suppliers. They don't want to import their nickel material or nickel chemicals from China. They want to produce it in-house. So obviously, a lot of US-based nickel projects and lithium projects are all getting pretty excited to try and get Elon to sign a contract with them. But manganese, manganese is a bulk commodity. It's also used primarily in the steel industry. So I don't think there's going to be any supply issues in terms of manganese and nickel. Cobalt, well, there'll always be some form of constraints there because of the fact that only one country really produces it, and that's the DRC. And it's that some of the big majors are in there, and I think I can't remember which automotive dealer I think has done a deal with Glencore to secure cobalt concentrates. So it's starting to happen, to start to see and maybe this is the investment that our industry needs, is to have a downstream, the right downstream guys to invest in the upstream to ensure their supply, as long as it's all done according to environmental, social, governance. If you can tick all those boxes, then I think you're in business.
I've got one more last question, and as a sort of a conclusion, how do you see these types of minerals, metals for the EV battery market? How do you see all this playing out over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, unless everyone's saying the demand for these materials is going to be there, and all the forecasts are saying we're not going to be able to, if we don't start investing now, we're not going to be able to cater for the demand, and that'll obviously have a knock-on effect of companies not being able to produce EVs because they can't get anode material, or they can't get cathode material for the batteries. So I think it's going to reach a pinch point in the next couple of years, and it's going to be interesting to see what Western companies are going to do to become vertically integrated, and rather not just produce a concentrate at the mine gate, but to take that and get vertically integrated and hopefully provide some competition, outside of China. But that's the challenge. But there's a lot of R&D going on into batteries themselves. So maybe in 5 years' time, we may no longer need graphite in the anode, and maybe there's talk of using lithium in the anode now as well. So with the amount of R&D going on, battery technology is going to change. So maybe that mix of manganese, cobalt, nickel, lithium, graphite, may change, but I think maybe the mixture will change. But I think essentially those are going to remain the fundamentals of portable batteries, for the next at least 3-4 years.
I was just going to ask one more last question, because I was going to ask substitutions. If there is a shortage supply in some of these commodities or minerals, should I say, is there any substitutes, or really you do need these particular minerals for the batteries? And but obviously, like you said, there's research and development, so things can change. But is there any other substitutes for some of these?
Well, I mean, in terms of the battery chemistry, it's often, especially when I'm talking about the cathode, it's varying proportions of nickel, manganese, and cobalt often. And now they're moving towards more nickel-rich cathodes, because nickel can, and these are for longer range vehicles, for example, and so more nickel-rich, and they're trying to reduce the amount of cobalt because of the issues around potential supply risk for cobalt. So all these variables need to be taken into account. But yeah, I don't see too many replacements. We'll see. I mean, yeah, I don't see too many. Well, I speak under correction.
Yeah. Really appreciate your time, Mike, for obviously providing this content around graphite, lithium, and the rest of the battery minerals. If people want to reach out and have any questions, how can they go about doing that? And are you on any social media channels?
I'm on LinkedIn. I think that'll be the best place to find me. My name, Mike Venter, or PH Consulting is my consulting firm. So my contact details are there.
Yeah. Okay. And again, all those will be in our show notes as well. So if you're listening to this, appreciate if you can share this content amongst people within the industry, and also obviously people outside the industry. I mean, people in the automotive industry could be interested in listening to what Mike has to say. Also, if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, appreciate if you can like and subscribe below. And so obviously that helps with the reach, and so more people can gain access to this content, and help everyone educate and learn more about obviously these particular minerals, and also around the green economy and what is happening in the world moving forward around battery and electric vehicles. So really appreciate your time, Mike, providing the content, and I'm sure our audience will be happy to listen to this, although obviously a few of them did reach out to me and suggest yourself as well, and obviously want to know more about graphite. So I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thank you, Rob.
So until next time, happy mining.